Hello and welcome to the Asian game here on day 3 of the FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. I'm Paul Williams, joined by James Kitching alongside me. James, thanks for joining us. Managing Director of the FC Sports as well. I think anyone who watches this video, listens to our podcast will be fully aware of who you are and your background in the sport. But for those who don't know, can you give us a quick introduction of your involvement in football throughout, the last decade or so?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. It's very kind of you to think that people might actually know who I am, but I very much doubt it.
I'm sure they do.
I very much doubt it. But back here in Adelaide now, World Cup fever in Victoria Square and, signs everywhere. And today happened to catch one of the teams going for a walk. But no, look, I'm currently running my own consulting firm in Australia now. Previously, I was a director at FIFA, director of football regulatory, running the football transfer system. And before that, I was at the AFC for 5.5 years in sports legal, handling all types of regulatory governance and disciplinary issues on behalf of the Confederation. So yeah, the last 10 years in and out of Asian football, in and out of world football, back here in Australia, running a consulting firm and working still with football clients, which is great.
Yeah. A very, very busy man. Should mention too that our coverage here is proudly sponsored by our great friends at SMC, and we thank them for jumping on board and helping us out throughout this World Cup. Quick recap of the results so far today. We had Japan play earlier. They got a big... was it 4 or 5 in the end? I lost track. It was 5. It was 5. They got one right at the end, the penalty right at the end. 5-0 win over Zambia in Hamilton. We'll cross to our man Alex Bishop over on the ground there for a recap of that. England has just defeated Haiti 1-0 as well. You got China playing Denmark, which kicks off in about 5 minutes' time as we're recording here as well. So a lot of action involving the Asian teams. Of course, have to mention Vietnam as well. That was the other game earlier this morning, very early this morning. It was 10:30 kickoff Adelaide time, which is quite remarkable. I was almost just getting out of bed. But 3-0 win for America, which, without wanting to sound condescending, is a fantastic result for Vietnam. I think a lot of people feared what the result might be going into that game, given what the Americans did to Thailand in 2019. That was a 13-0 win on that occasion. I think a lot of people feared it might be the same result. Wasn't to be the case. I know you were watching that game this morning. Just give us your quick impressions on that and a very good Vietnam performance.
Yeah, I had a little fight with my daughter over whether the football or the Wiggles would win, but football won in the end.
Always does.
It absolutely always does. So I thought the US was relatively decent in the first half. We're on top. The 2 goals that they scored, came through good passages of play, but Vietnam held their own. They didn't look out of depth. In the second half, as the game wore on, it really was, I thought, a lot more even than most people would have expected. So I think it was, as a heartening result. It wasn't the 2019 repeat of that result there, and Vietnam could take a lot away from that, being their first time at the World Cup and playing the world champions. What an incredible first stage to be on. So I thought they did really well in the end, and gives them a lot of positives going to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we continue on, Vietnam journalist Hoang Tri Cong was at the game and sent us this little report from Eden Park afterwards.
Hello Paul, I'm Cong, I'm from Vietnam. I am journalist of Vietnam Football Daily Magazine. So Vietnam lost America, USA. I think the reason maybe many people predict before the game. But I think score is so suitable for Vietnam, and we have a good display with America, USA, the best team of the world in the women football. I think Kim Thanh, the goalkeeper, is the best performance today. She stopped the penalty kick of a superstar of USA. We have 2 games and we try our best for the Portugal and Netherlands. We go on. We can do this.
All right, we'll continue on now, James. You were in Auckland for the opening game. I think you landed back here in Adelaide yesterday. What have you made of the tournament so far? There was a stunning result in the game that you're at. I don't think many people thought New Zealand would get the result there. Their first ever win at a FIFA World Cup match. We've seen some fantastic football across all the cities. Perhaps some surprising results with how close some of the games have been involving the debutants, if we take out the Zambia-Japan result today. So what have you made of the tournament so far?
I mean, I think it's been great football for a start. Obviously you and I are a little bit biased potentially with who we're going for, but when we watch all the other matches, and for those who might not necessarily have watched much women's football in their time, there's been some great football on the park, some really solid matchups. And even in Japan, Zambia today, I was watching that over dinner tonight. I still thought Zambia did really well, but the Japanese team just demonstrated that they have the potential to go really far in the tournament in terms of the way that they set up their shape at the back. They played the ball out wide. But the tournament itself, that first game, it was a magical moment. When Wilkinson scored the goal, the stadium went wild. When Stott was substituted after everything she's been through, huge ovation from the crowd, which was really, really blessing. A real, great moment there. Norway, I thought, were disappointing. I expected a bit more from them, and New Zealand, all they had to do was take advantage of that, and they did, which was great. But the rest of the games, and the ones that I've managed to see when I haven't been on a plane or elsewhere, I think the football's been good. There's been some good quality football, great attendances across both Australia and New Zealand. We've read a lot of stories about ticket sales in New Zealand, etc., about the, over 40,000 for both matches in Auckland thus far, and as I understand it, the Japanese game this afternoon was also well attended. So great attendances, very decent football, and the debutantes have also stood up and done really well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the crowds there, because there was some conjecture going into the tournament about what type of crowds we might see in New Zealand, given what had been reported as slow ticket sales. As you said, there was a record crowd in the opening game in Auckland, 42,000. I think there was 41,000 again today for the US-Vietnam match. There was 16,000 in Hamilton, which is a fantastic crowd. There's 44,000 at Brisbane Stadium, as it is for this tournament, in Brisbane tonight for the England game. I think China-Denmark in Perth is pretty much sold out as well. So for all the talk that there might have been some slow ticket sales, there's over 1.2 million tickets sold throughout the entire tournament, and we're seeing some fantastic crowds. So on the back of that, then, what can this tournament do for Australian football and women's football here in Australia as well?
It's a good question. Before we get to that point, I was in Auckland yesterday, flew back last night, and the whole of downtown Auckland was American. Couldn't go anywhere without American accent. There's so many fans that had travelled to New Zealand for a women's football tournament, which naysayers might raise some questions which become memes because they're completely shot out of the park and wrong. And that's great for a country, that boom of individuals coming in and spending dollars there and supporting the local economies. But what can Australia do? We're very lucky that we have a strong, deep understanding of how to build on major events in Australia, and major sporting events in particular. Football Australia last week put out their pre-tournament legacy report, and one of the key headline items of that was they've unlocked $350 million plus of government money. And that's the true legacy that moves forward from major sporting events. I was on a panel, luckily enough, with Sarah Walsh from Football Australia and Sarai Berriman, the Chief Women's Football Officer at FIFA, a couple of weeks ago at a conference. And I was asked a very similar question in terms of how do you capitalise from legacy, from major events and turn that into legacy. And that was my response was, well, you have to understand who pays for major events and how you tap into major events. And the first thing you need is to benefit economically from them. And Football Australia's done an amazing job in unlocking that money. And then it's a matter now of continuing that relationship with government and continuing that investment, using that money for the right things in terms of participation, in terms of high performance, in terms of infrastructure. All of those things which they can harness from a World Cup in their country to make women's football continue to boom and improve and continue that next generation of Matildas and the next generation of A-League women's players as well.
If we take that then more broadly, you've had an involvement with the AFC, as you mentioned in the past. If you go back 10, 15 years, Asia was almost a leader in women's football. You had the likes of China, Japan, even Australia when they first joined the AFC, North Korea certainly as well, South Korea to a lesser extent. But you had a lot of those nations in the top 10, top 15 in the world. We've seen over the last couple of years the rise of women's football in Europe that's now started to overshadow anything here in Asia. I think Asia's been asleep at the wheel in that regard. So what can women's football in Asia get off the back of this as well? We've got the A-League women's competition here in Australia, which will hopefully experience a boom. The WE League in Japan is only a couple of years old. crazy to think that they've only got a professional league a couple of years ago, but that's the story. The Korean league is of mixed quality depending on who you talk to, and then outside of that, perhaps you got China as well, but outside of that, there's not a great deal. Encouragingly, Saudi Arabia is one that's making a big, massive investment in women's football at the moment. We hope that can sort of spread across the region. So how can women's football in Asia capitalise on the back of this as well? Because it is a Women's World Cup being staged in Asia as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, we're only just over a decade removed from an Asian world champion, aren't we? Yep. And an Asian team backing it up and making the final again in 2015. I think 2019 was a little bit of, provided some foresight to where we are now. Some people maybe wrote it off as a World Cup in Europe, in European conditions and European summer, etc. But the strength of the European national teams at that tournament really demonstrated that the gap had closed, and what we were able to get away with in Asia, I will say, and I'll get to my point as to why I use those words, but we were able to get away with, couldn't be gotten away with anymore. And that's because of what I call, and what people might have heard me talk about before, is the beating heart of football, which is club football. And there was direct investment in Europe by the clubs mostly, some federations, but mostly by the clubs, into women's sides and into women's football. And once they put those players into full-time professional conditions, gave them contracts, gave them training and facilities, which allowed them to develop in a way which they hadn't been previously had access to. They can see the results flowing on, not only with the attention that women's football started to receive in Europe and the performances on the field, but also then how that translates into national team football. And what's actually quite interesting, I think it was the World Leagues Forum put out some documentation this week, as well as also the European Clubs Association. When you have a look at the leagues and the clubs that have released the most players to this tournament, by far and away it's the European leagues, and by far and away it's the big European clubs. And that goes without saying that a lot of the best players from Asia, from Japan and Australia, have migrated there because they can access those conditions, access that infrastructure, access that training. And where that leaves Asia, well, that's a lesson, all right? And the lesson is it's not just about investing in your national team setup and what you can put around the national team and how the national team trains and develops and works together, but it's really about the local game, the domestic game, providing those opportunities for those young girls, for those women coming through, giving them that full-time professional opportunity to actually make the most of the talent that they have. And without that opportunity, we've already seen that in Australia the last couple of years, haven't we? All of our best players have migrated to the best leagues in the world that are providing those opportunities, providing that money, and providing the best possible football for them. And that translates now into national team football. So that's where Asia really needs to lift its game. You mentioned Australia and Japan as two of the leagues here which are doing, I would say, decently. Saudi obviously is investing a lot of money in football, and that includes women's football. Obviously, it has a very long way to go to get to, to get to anywhere close to what we see in Australia and Japan, let alone in Europe. But that there is a pathway there. The work has already been done effectively. It's obviously it's not a one-stop shop and not a square box and the same peg fits in the same hole, etc. But the results speak for themselves, and so hopefully that can be translated, and you have administrators in Asia can take advantage of that. And I'm absolutely certain that everyone in Australia will, post World Cup, utilise that funding that's been unlocked, utilise the increased interest in the women's game to unlock the A-League women even more in that respect. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on there with the clubs leading the way. I was having a look through some stats before the World Cup started of how many players actually played their club football in Asia that have been selected outside of course, the Asian nations. If you discount the ones from the A-League women's competition in the Philippines and the Australian squad, and just look at players from sort of outside AFC nations, I think it was four. Right. 4 players play their club football in Asia. One of those was Moroccan in Saudi Arabia, funnily enough, who only started their league last season. So, I mean, a lot of people are very cynical about Saudi's push into women's football, but, it's absolutely got to be encouraged. They're going about it the right way. They're investing heavily. They're investing the right way. So we hope that has long-term benefits as well. I'll come back to you in a second, James. You were just talking about Japan there. Of course, they had a big 5-0 win earlier today in Hamilton against Zambia. Our man on the ground, Alex Bishop, was there, and he filed this report after full time.
What were we worried about? Heading into the game, I think this was one that a lot of people were looking at as maybe being one of the games in match day 1 that would actually cough up a bit of a surprise result, considering the Germany game with Zambia winning that one 3-2. It simply wasn't the case today. Japan came out flying, playing how they normally play, which is the high intensity, possession-based football. Many different ideas of how to approach the goal, whether it's through intricate passing, whether it's through a shot from range, or using the wide areas as well. We saw it all. Took a little while for the first goal to come. That came in at the 43-minute mark. Hinata Miyazawa, who plays domestically in the WE League, she broke the deadlock for Japan. And then after that, heading into half-time, they came out more of the same. Zambia only seemed to kind of just be able to handle it less from then on. Japan really kind of grew into the game, and then Mina Tanaka, after having 2 attempts, 2 goals ruled out for offside, she finally, third time lucky, managed to actually find the net and keep this 1 goal to make it 2-0. Miyazawa again for the 3rd. Jun Endo for the 4th, and then finally via a penalty kick it was Riko Ueki who made it 5-0, and then it was job all done, game, set and match. Japan walk away the deserved victors, so they now top the group. They go ahead of Spain on goal difference now. Spain on 3+3, Japan on +5. That could really come in handy on the last game, the 3rd game when Japan plays Spain. If Japan have the goal difference advantage, then they would only need a draw to finish top. Who knows what that would do, who they'd be paired with in Group A. But next up, Japan will go on to play Costa Rica down in Dunedin. I mean, I imagine there's going to be a lot of mix-ups for that, given the, I hate to say, the quality of the opposition there. We did see Costa Rica kind of done quite badly there against Spain last night, so I imagine Ikeda will want to rotate a little bit. He will, maybe bring in a few of the fresher faces, a few of the less known, less prominent names, shall we say. Get them up to match fitness as well. Take the time to rest a few other players, and all kind of a very, very good start really for Japan at this World Cup, I think. Like I said before, there was a lot of doubt heading into this, a lot of concern whether Japan would be able to handle the physicality, the pace element, and all that kind of stuff, and they've handled it brilliantly, and the way they handled it was not taking the approach of just sinking into a back 5 and sitting back inviting pressure. It was to take the game to the opponent's half, take it into their attacking third and play the game there. If it's played there, if the ball's in their end, they can't score. That's kind of how it played out. That's what they do best, and they are true to their approach, true to their philosophy. So I expect we'll see a lot more of this going forward in the tournament. They will try and play their way. They will be relentless in the pressing. They'll be very hard working throughout. I think we'll see a lot of that in this World Cup, actually, given the hog, especially here in New Zealand. It is actually freezing. If I appear to be a little bit overdressed, a little bit cold, then it's because I absolutely am. I think, teams will be able to kind of expend a lot of energy in games. They don't have to worry about the heat like in Japan the situation is now. They would have to do that. So I think, that will really play into their advantage. Okay, well, thanks very much. That's it from me for tonight. So do check in with us. We'll be with you for all of the games featuring Asian nations. I will be back with you for the game against Costa Rica, Japan-Costa Rica in a couple of days, and we'll take it from there.
And thanks to Alex for that one there. Just before I let you go, James, you touched on it a little bit earlier before, but I think it's worth touching on again. This is the first Women's World Cup that will feature 32 teams, an expanded tournament. We're going to see the Men's World Cup expand next time, adding an extra 16 teams to 48. There's always a lot of conjecture around expanded tournaments. A lot of people think that it dilutes the quality. You're going to have massive blowouts. We haven't necessarily seen that this tournament, though. It hasn't actually manifested that way. As that if you take out the Japan-Zambia result, and 5-0's it's a heavy scoreline, but it's not an absolute thrashing that you would look at like the 13-0 America-Thailand a few years ago. So, as I said, Vietnam got a really good result. Haiti got a great result. Even Ireland, in their debut tournament, really pushed Australia in that game as well. So, the expansion of this tournament and what it does for women's football around the world, it can only be positive, I think.
No, I agree. If you don't provide the opportunity, people won't take it. And in this respect, Lyon, that final in 2019, that full stadium, I was there, remembering the chance of equal pay, of everything that was coming through. The atmosphere that was created there, and the atmosphere in France for the time that I was in the country as well, towards the back end of that tournament. It's a no-brainer to expand and to continue to grow this part of football, the women's game. And I think FIFA initially, if you recall, didn't actually intend to expand to 32 teams for the 2023 World Cup. It was something which was on the table, but wasn't necessarily a done deal. But once they've expanded it, it makes perfect sense. You have a look at the teams that are here that are new. New in the sense of new at World Cups. They've obviously participated in Euros, in AFC Women's Asian Cups, etc., etc. And, performed admirably and performed well and deserved their spot here. Zambia, you talk maybe a heavy scoreline, but Japan, I thought, actually were the best team so far that I've seen. They played brilliantly and were unlucky maybe not to score another one. But really, it's a no-brainer. And FIFA, I wouldn't say has been slow to the mark. It's a cultural thing in football, as we all know. We're two men standing here talking about it. But it's a cultural thing in football, and FIFA has a dedicated women's football department, a very strong focus on the development of the women's game and the amount of money they're investing into women's football and the types of things that they're doing globally. And to take the Pinnacle Women's Tournament and expand it, provide more opportunities to play in it, but also pre-tournament, as you know, there was a talk about television rights and what is the appropriate amount of money to be paid for broadcast rights by broadcasters. FIFA's also aggregating its commercial rights for women's football separately from men's football for the first time, to really try and put a value on it and then to try and grow that and to really understand where that landscape is. That's another cultural thing which has changed. Many sports do actually do that. They just lump the rights all in together and they see a value for the sport which is led by a men's league or a men's national team. But here you're really going to have a push to put a value on something, and or value on something which is the cost of hosting or cost of accessing the broadcast rights for the Women's World Cup in particular territories, and being able to continue and help contribute to the growth of that, both in the strong countries of women's football, but also in the countries where women's football is not as strong. So I think here, it's just a matter of opportunity, and we've already just spoken about the opportunity to teams to actually enter the competition. But a 32-team World Cup provides a greater opportunity across all different types of metrics. And you can just imagine, wherever the next Women's World Cup goes, I think we have a good idea of where that might be. Just what that's going to do there from a metrics perspective off the field as well, as it continues to go from strength to strength. So I think it's a great thing to expand the Women's World Cup. Obviously, it was a challenge for the organisers to perhaps started the bidding process for slightly less teams, or 8 less teams. They've expanded the tournament by a third. But the reality is it makes sense, and it was the right move and the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of opportunities, we're going to hopefully speak to some of the players from some of the lesser-known nations in Asia throughout our series here on the Asian game at the World Cup. But the rain is starting to fall where we are now, James, so we probably should get out of the rain and get some cover somewhere. As you can see, it's very cold. We've both got jackets and scarves on. James, thanks very much for joining us. We'll have you back with us throughout the tournament here on the Asian Game Podcast. As I said, all our coverage here is sponsored by our good friends at SMC. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Asian Game Podcast here at the FIFA Women's World Cup, hopefully with some better weather here in Adelaide. But until then, it's bye for now.